census is tremendously important to our community and to our nation, but I would say at this time it's critically important to those of us who live in the Gulf Coast region. We must find our people. We're still looking for our people, and we want the best for our people. It's been a struggle, and as we approach the 4th anniversary of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita, we ask God's remembrance for those who are not with us, and his blessings for those who still struggle to get back together. When the request was made of me to host this press conference, I said to, I think it was Jeff on the phone, that for many people, they're living on what I call the banana peel. In our region, they have 1 foot in Atlanta, 1 foot in Baton Rouge, 1 foot in Houston, and Hart, and another foot in New Orleans. And so there's going to be some struggles around discussion about the census. I'd like to welcome Wade Henderson, Trap Bonner, and Monique Harden. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Wade Henderson, president of the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights. Today, as we approach the 4th anniversary of, Today, as we approach the 4th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina, the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights Education Fund is releasing a report called Counting in the Wake of Catastrophe, Challenges and Recommendations for the 2010 Census in the Gulf Coast region. Copies are available for your review. This report provides a fresh assessment of the current demographic conditions in the region and the immense challenges they pose to achieving an accurate census count. It also sets out a series of practical recommendations for policymakers and the Census Bureau designed to ensure the most accurate count possible. As you know, next spring the nation will embark on its once-a-decade head count of every person living in the United States. It's a count that determines the number of representatives a state sends to Congress and the distribution of $400 billion in federal funds, not just for 1 year, but for each year of the next decade. We at the Leadership Conference are concerned about the fairness and accuracy of the 2010 census. Historically, communities of color, low-income people, people with disabilities, and people with limited English skills have consistently been undercounted. In the Gulf region, people of color are far more likely to live in areas designated as hard to count. In the 2000 census, 41.5% of blacks and 30% of Asian Americans in Louisiana lived in hard-to-count areas, compared with 8% of non-Hispanic whites. The pattern is similar in Mississippi and Alabama, and that was before the devastation of Katrina. Any census count that misses the most vulnerable in our society raises serious civil rights concerns. Concerns about equal treatment under the law and equal access to economic opportunity. These are rights that the Leadership Conference has fought to secure for 60 years. To us, an accurate census is a civil rights imperative. Now, I'm a realist, and I know it's always difficult to get a complete census count anywhere. But the massive destruction of housing, the difficulty of classifying addresses in areas of lingering blight, rapidly changing conditions generated by ongoing rebuilding, and a level of distrust in the government due to its failure to plan, prepare, and respond will make it even harder for the Gulf Coast. Whatever the reasons, we can't accept an undercount here. Katrina was a natural disaster and a man-made catastrophe. A 2010 census count that misses people in the hardest hit Gulf areas would be one more devastating blow, depriving the region's communities of the assistance they need to fully recover. Over the next decade, trillions of dollars in government and private funding and investment decisions will be made based on the 2010 count. These funds will be used to invest in education, health care, job training, economic development, transportation, and other services that directly affect the daily lives of individuals and the health and safety of whole communities. Likewise, if members of your community are not counted, your community will not get the money and representation necessary to take care of its needs. We're joining the call for Congress to hold field hearings in the Gulf Coast as soon as possible to examine the barriers here to achieving an accurate census and to evaluate the steps being taken to overcome these obstacles. We also believe that Congress should recognize that many people who consider this region as their home have not yet been able to return. That's why we recommend that Congress authorize a federally funded special census in 2012 or 2013 in designated Gulf Coast communities still recovering from Hurricane Katrina. I'd like to now invite Trupania of Moving Forward Gulf Coast, one of our census partners in the Gulf, and a contributor to our report, to say a few words. Trap?
Again, Trupania Bonner, Executive Director of Moving Forward Gulf Coast, native of New Orleans, and also a survivor of Hurricane Katrina, and someone who was displaced to return home to find work, but also to find my entire city in disarray. So we've been focusing with, in partnership with the Leadership Conference on Civil Rights, and also many of the Gulf Coast advocates working to help their communities rebuild post-Katrina, and embarking on this public education campaign around the 2010 census. We do believe that there are many contributors to keeping our folks displaced, and many contributors to the fact that it's going to be a hard-to-count census altogether. The number of people still living in temporary housing and high vacancy rates will make an accurate census count more challenging, right? There's roughly 66,000 as of March of 2009, 66,000 unoccupied residential units in New Orleans alone, right? In St. Bernard, nearly 50% of their residential units are unoccupied, or unoccupied. This poses a serious issue for the Census Bureau around Gulf Coast enumeration, right? And so we're going to need double the manpower within the Bureau. We're going to need double the money and financing. The Bureau needs a focused public education campaign to address these unique circumstances, and it also needs additional workers, right, to follow up enumeration to make sure no one is left out of the count. And with that, I'll introduce Dr. Monique Harden of the Advocates for Environmental Human Rights.
Trap calls me doctor. Affectionately, I'm not a doctor, but I'm a lawyer and co-director of Advocates for Environmental Human Rights here in New Orleans, my home city. And again, my name is Monique Harden. The issue at hand today in terms of an accurate census count is critical, and it's one more of those governmental policies that we face 4 years and counting after Hurricane Katrina to address the needs and the gaps and the shortfalls that exist for people who are uprooted from their homes and remain displaced. One of the opportunities I've had the privilege of taking part in is the Children's Defense Fund's Katrina Citizen Leadership Corps. And the Katrina Citizen Leadership Corps is an organization of folks from New Orleans and the Gulf region who are displaced and living in Houston, Texas, Atlanta, Georgia, parts of Mississippi. Just thinking about the situation for those some 250 members of the Katrina Citizen Leadership Corps, each and every one of them has been working over the last 4 years to find their way back home. Each and every one of them has been dealing with one governmental bureaucratic barrier after another and trying to rebuild their homes and restore their communities. And for those reasons, they remain displaced. We're no longer, after 4 years of Katrina, displaced by the consequences, by the impact of poor flood protection, where we remain in a situation of prolonged displacement because of inadequate, ineffective governmental policies. that'll create barriers to coming back home, and also have the effect of putting us in a situation where we're living very destabilized lives, where we are uprooted multiple times wherever we are, and trying to make those steps to come back home is extremely difficult.